Voice over IP is technology used to send voice calls, traditional telephone calls, over the internet. So instead of the voice call travelling down a traditional copper telephone line as you would have at home, for instance, it actually travels over your internet connection, over your broadband or whatever connectivity you have into your business. Voice over IP is different from a traditional phone service in the sense that it uses the internet instead of it using a traditional telephone line. That in itself gives you loads of additional benefits in terms of flexibility, home working, disaster recovery, etc, etc. So I wouldn't necessarily say voice over IP is a better service than traditional telephony, but it's certainly a lot more flexible. Well, the first thing that you need to do is select a supplier for your voice over IP service, and that will very much dictate what sort of equipment you will need. Fundamentally, there are two different types of voice over IP. You have what's called a hosted solution, where the network services are held at network level, where the function is held at network level. And then you also have a PBX, or a telephone system replacement voice over IP, where instead of you having a traditional telephone system on site, you have a voice over IP telephone system on site. So it very much does depend on what type of solution you feel is best for your business. It really does depend on the number of users that you have at that site connected to that single internet connection. Will determine the bandwidth that you require for those users. For example, a 1 meg broadband connection that would be more than enough for a home user, a single home user, whereas if a business had, say, 30 or 40 users on site, you would probably be looking at having a dedicated broadband service for that solution. So it really does depend on the number of users that you have at that site. Voice over IP is, generally speaking, more cost effective than a traditional solution on two fronts, both the call costs and the rental of the service itself. So it really does ultimately depend on what type of solution you end up going for, whether you're looking for a hosted solution where all the flexibility and program is done at network level, or whether you're looking for an on-site solution. But the key thing to bear in mind is, generally speaking, it will be more cost effective than a traditional solution. That really is one of the key advantages of voice over IP is the flexibility of the service. So yes, voice over IP can scale up and conversely scale down in line with your business needs. If you need an additional user, then that user can be set up extremely quickly, all done remotely, without having to send engineers to site, etc. And that can be done next day. But then if you need to scale back, again, that can be done very, very quickly indeed. Extremely. I mean, that is one of the key advantages of voice over IP. If you're going for an on-site voice over IP replacement for your telephone system, then of course there will be the usual installation and cost of equipment. Whereas if you go down my personally preferred route of a hosted voice over IP solution, everything is actually completed remotely. So we would build a system for you via your administrative portal, and we would dispatch the handsets directly to site, and literally all you need to do is plug them in and turn them on. Okay, I mean there's kind of two ways that voice over IP can integrate with a mobile handset. First of all, you've got your twinning or your call forwarding. So for example, if someone was to call your direct dial, you have that automatically paired to ring back over the mobile network and call your mobile handset. So if someone dials your DDI, it rings both those endpoints at the same time. The second way that it can integrate with mobiles is with many suppliers you can actually have an app that you install onto your mobile device, and that app then actually becomes your extension, your endpoint of your voice over IP solution. So providing you're connected to either Wi-Fi or 4G, for example, when someone calls your direct dial, in my instance an 01733 number, that would actually ring over Wi-Fi or over 4G to the app on my phone, and I would be receiving a free call to my phone. So yeah, there's two ways it can integrate with mobile telephones. Well, voice over IP by its very nature is voice over the internet, and therefore the speed and quality of your internet connection is going to be directly proportional to the quality of the service you get over it. Voice over IP kind of got a bit of a bad name for itself. When voice over IP first came out back in, say, 2004, 2005 was when it started to be adopted. Internet connectivity in the UK just wasn't up to par. And therefore people adopted voice over IP. The internet service that they were using wasn't providing the correct speeds that they needed for the service, and therefore there was this degradation in quality. Nowadays, with super fast broadband, fibre broadband, leased line connectivity, quality just isn't really an issue anymore. Ultimately, it depends on what solution you eventually decide to adopt. However, for example, with one of the hosted voice over IP services that Quest provides, there are the elementary type services, things like groups for department calling or pickup groups. You have the other basics such as voicemail, and whether that be individual voicemail or a group voicemail for, say, a sales department or something. But then there's the more advanced solutions that you would only normally get with a massive investment if you were talking a traditional phone system, things like call queuing. I mean, we can queue up to 500 calls at network level. There is call recording. So, for example, part way through a conversation, you could dial a short code on your phone and you could actually start recording that conversation right to the beginning of when that call commenced. Finally, there's things like advanced statistics. If you were to run a sales department, for example, and you wanted to analyse how effective your salespeople were being, you could actually run real-time reports on how active they were being on the phone. And finally, things like automatic call distribution, where you, as a caller, are presented with a number of options, press 1 for sales or 2 for support. That can be provided in the bare bones entry level of a hosted voice over IP solution. So it really does add a lot more features than you would get versus a traditional solution of the same size. Of course, yeah, you can get rid of your traditional telephone system and invest in a voice over IP one. But the real question is why? What additional features are you looking to get from a telephone system? Are you looking for something specific like call recording or queuing calls at network level? In my opinion, there's lots of companies out there that will be more than willing to try and sell you something. But from our point of view, we really just want to understand what it is you need as a business in order to make the decision on whether you need to invest in a new solution or not. Okay, well, first of all, let's look at how a traditional telephone system is managed on a day-to-day basis. If you were to have a new user or require an additional extension or for any fundamental change to the programming of the telephone system, you would generally have a support engineer that you would have on call that you would probably pay a monthly or annual retainer for their support. With a hosted voice over IP telephone system, the whole system itself is driven via a portal that's accessible from your internet connection. The reason for that is to enable you, as an end user, to be able to control your system. So if you want to rename a user, add them to a group, or take them out of a group, create a new user, manage recordings, manage call queue lengths, etc. The array of things that you would normally pass to an off-site system maintainer, that's the sort of thing that you can now actually start to do in-house, which conversely saves you money. Voice over IP by its very nature is extremely flexible. So, for example, businesses that are perhaps multi-sited, they've got a couple of offices across the UK, or perhaps even salespeople working from home. Those extensions can be in their home offices or in those regional offices, and they can all talk to each other absolutely free of charge. Another example would be businesses that need to scale up and scale back at specific times of the year. Think about maybe a busy Christmas period. They have 20 additional staff come in for that 2-month period. So they could scale the solution up when they need it and also scale it back when they don't. We've got an example of a customer that uses our hosted solution internationally. They've got offices in Boston, New York and London, and they can all talk to each other absolutely free of charge. The final point that I'd make on that is once your solution is in the voice over IP world, you can literally move it wherever you want, whenever you want, providing there's an internet connection. So for example, if you decided that you were moving office, all you need to do is unplug your telephone extensions out of your broadband connection, unplug them into a new one, and away you go.